Hello everybody, and welcome to today's taster session for sociology. I'm Mrs Fazackerley. I teach sociology. I also teach English language in the second year. So if you're doing English language, you might well have me next year as well. I'm head of faculty for humanities. So if you're doing humanities subjects like history, English, sociology, and so on, then you might see me, you will see me about quite a lot. So welcome to today's session. Today's session is on crime and deviance. So as I said, we're looking at crime and deviance today. So what I'd like you to do is go through the PowerPoint. There's a series of short tasks. Please stop the PowerPoint and just do it at your own pace. I suggest that you do each task in turn and then move on to the next slide and do that task and so on. So obviously you can pause anything if you want to. So I'm just going to talk over each task to explain what you do. There's a handout also if you want to complete the handout, but of course you can just write it on your own paper. You don't need to use the handout if you don't want to. It's whatever you prefer. So for today's session, what we're trying to do is we're trying to define crime and deviance. We're going to consider the severity of criminal and deviant acts. We're going to research historical and cross-cultural crimes. And we're going to start to think about why people commit crime and consider sanctions. So sanctions are basically punishments. So what do we mean when we talk about crime and deviance? Well, crime, as you're probably aware, is an illegal act and it's punishable by law. So it can result in criminal proceedings if detected. So, for example, if you commit a murder, then the likelihood is that you will end up in prison. So that would be the sanction for that particular crime. And then we've got deviance. Well, deviance is slightly different from crime in that it's behaviour that doesn't conform to society's norms. And often this can lead to negative sanctions if detected. So people might laugh at you, for example. So if I turn up teaching in a bikini, God forbid, then you're probably going to be quite shocked because that's not the norm. Now, on your handout, or indeed you can just draw one of your own, I'd like you to just think about your understanding, your experiences of crime. So if you complete the mind map template or you draw a mind map of your own, we're looking at these things. We're looking at your experiences of crime. We're looking at what are serious crimes. What would you class as minor crimes? So there's an example there of getting a parking ticket. And also we're going to think about crime in the media. What kinds of crimes are in the media? So, for example, if you've got a parking ticket, it's probably not likely to be in the media. So crime and media are really important and quite lengthy topics in sociology, so we're just going to think about those. So the first task I'd like you to do is identify the crime. So what we've got here on the left hand side, we've got some descriptions. On the right hand side, we've got the name of the crime. So what you need to do is basically match up So entering somebody's home and stealing his or her things, and then you need to write down what the crime is in the right hand column. Intentionally killing somebody, you need to write the crime in the right hand column again. For the next two, you need to look up definitions and jot those in the left hand column, the description column. Okay, so if you want to pause and complete that task, again it's on the handout, or you can just write it up on your own paper. Now, I'd like you to think about these actions and rank them from most deviant to least deviant. So we've got using a fake ID to get into a nightclub, sitting next to a stranger on an empty bus, stealing a jumper from a charity shop, reading a partner's text messages, smoking cannabis in the cinema. So these are all deviant. So your job now is to decide which you think is the most deviant and the least deviant and rank them in order. Now, there's no right answers in sociology, and this is why I love it, one of the reasons, because we can just discuss it and think about things. Why is it deviant? Why is it not deviant? Why do people think differently? Because I dare say that you probably won't rank them in the same way exactly, all of you. So that's what we would normally discuss face to face in class. So now you rank the following actions from the most criminal to the least criminal. So which do you think is the most severe crime? Dropping a crisp packet on the floor and not picking it up. Keeping extra change if somebody gives you more change than you should have got at a shop. Driving at 33 miles per hour in a 30 mile per hour zone. Punching somebody after being called a name. Carrying a weapon. Not giving someone a job because of their gender. And not giving someone a job because of their ethnicity. So what I'd like you to do is the same sort of thing that you did on the last task. So you need to rank them from what you feel is the most criminal act to the least criminal act. Now then, I'd like you to draw a Venn diagram, just like you've got on the slide here. So on the left hand circle, you would put the criminal acts. All these can be found on the next slide. So if you draw your Venn diagram like this and then look at the next slide to see what you need to put in which circle. Okay, and then you do the same, you put the deviant acts in the blue in the right hand side. If you think that certain things are both criminal and deviant, then you put them in the overlapping section. And if you think that the acts are neither criminal nor deviant, then you can just put them on the left hand side beside the circle. So if you look at the next slide, you'll see the list of acts which you can plot into the Venn diagram. Okay, so here are the acts that you need to put in your Venn diagram. So we've got dropping a crisp packet on the floor and not picking it up, keeping extra change given to you to shop, driving at 33 miles per hour in the 30 mile per hour zone, punching someone after being called a name, carrying a weapon, not giving a job because of gender, not giving a job because of ethnicity, using a fake ID to get into a nightclub, sitting next to a stranger on an empty bus, stealing a jumper from a charity shop, reading a partner's text messages, smoking cannabis in the cinema. So if you'd like to take those acts and plot them into your Venn diagram, but I'd also like you to see if you can add some more actions in all areas of the diagram, so pick some of your own. Now the thing is, the interesting thing about crime is that, well, basically it's made up in across over time and in different places. So what was a crime hundreds of years ago might not be a crime now. Of course, we get new, different crimes. Cybercrime, for example, is obviously a new crime, wouldn't have existed 100 years ago. And also cross-cultural evidence. So things that are crimes aren't crimes in every place across the world. So we've got different cultures that consider different acts to be crimes. So, historical and cross-cultural evidence suggests that what is classed as criminal can change over time and vary between cultures. So what I'd like you to do now is have a little research and see if you can find examples of acts that used to be criminal in the UK and are now not deemed to be criminal. I'd also like you to find examples of crimes in different countries which are not crimes in the UK. Now just a couple of examples here. So in the 1920s, it was illegal to produce and drink alcohol in the USA. So that's a law, a crime that's changed over time. And in Saudi Arabia, there are laws against the public interaction of women with men other than their husbands. So that represents differences in time and differences in culture. So if you do the research tasks and see if you can come up with any other examples. Now, I'd like you to imagine that you're on the parole board of a prison. So you're responsible for choosing who gets released and who doesn't. Now the prison is overcrowded, so you've got to release one prisoner early. On the next slide, you need to study the descriptions of 5 possible candidates for release and make a decision on who you would set free. Also try and jot down some reasons for your answer. So we've got Alan Jones, who's guilty of murdering his wife by slowly poisoning her. Described by neighbours as a kind and gentle person. His children love him. His wife had lots of affairs and pushed him to the limit. And then we've got Janet Green, who was found guilty of shoplifting for the 10th time. She's homeless and likes to spend the winter in prison. It's early December and the weather is very cold. Or we've got Miranda Morgan, a drug addict guilty of selling heroin to teenagers. She's already tried 2 unsuccessful drug treatment programs. She has a 2-year-old child who will have to go into care if she goes to jail. Or we've got Mick Brown. He's guilty of vandalism and football hooliganism. 19 years old and below average intelligence. He's aggressive and gets violent when drunk. He has got 1 previous offence for drunk driving. Or we've got Cynthia Carter. Is an English teacher guilty of stealing money from her school by claiming money for resources but actually buying herself designer clothes on the high street? So there you go. They are the 5 members of the prison that are up for parole. So your job now is to decide who it is that you're going to release and try and think about why. Now again, you might not have the same answers as each other, and that's absolutely fine, but just try and think, what is it that makes you decide on that particular person? And I've just now the final task then is to imagine that you're standing for election as a police and crime commissioner for your local area. A police and crime commissioner, a PCC, is an elected official in England and Wales charged with securing efficient and effective policing of a police area. So what I'd like you to do is think about what your top 5 priorities would be. Sorry, my email's going off there. So what would your top 5 priorities be if you were the police and crime commissioner? So, for example, it might be less waste, more policing, might be putting victims first, etc., etc. So I'd like you to come up with 5 things. So you can either just list them, or you can, if you're feeling creative, you can design a leaflet, a persuasive leaflet that has got your top 5 priorities on. So I'll just show you an example, and then you can see, you can have a think about what you would class as your key priorities. Okay, so this is an example, things like freezing council tax, more police, repair roads, etc., etc. So that's just an example that you can have a look at, and so if you want to design a leaflet, that's the kind of thing that you would probably put through people's doors. But otherwise, feel free to just list your key 5 things. Now then, well done. You've completed all the tasks. I hope it provoked some thought, so that's good, and we can discuss those when we actually meet face to face, which I'm really quite excited about. So I will do a short feedback PowerPoint. So that'll follow, and we'll think about your possible answers and your thoughts. Like I say, there's no real right answers or anything, so we'll just have a brief feedback session. So I'll see you then. Thank you for listening, and well done.